Frank grew up in the deep, forested hills of southeastern Kentucky, a place where the mountains roll endlessly and the woods seem to hold their breath after sundown. Locals there speak softly about strange beings that stalk the ridges, woolly boogers, as the old-timers call them. Most people dismiss the stories as mountain folklore, but for Frank, the tales were more than myths. They became a thread woven through his entire life, from childhood to military service, and eventually across the forests of North America. What he experienced left him convinced that something large, intelligent, and rarely seen moves through the wilderness just beyond the reach of ordinary life. His earliest encounters were subtle at first, just enough to unsettle a young boy without fully revealing what lurked in the shadows. Frank remembers fishing alone along a quiet Kentucky river, the type of waterway where the trees lean in close and the world turns still. He cast his line into the water, waiting in silence. Then, without warning, a massive rock crashed into the river just a few yards away. It wasn't a pebble, or a stone someone could skip with a flick of the wrist. This was a boulder, so heavy that only something with immense strength could have lifted it. At first, he thought someone was playing a prank, but the woods remained eerily silent, and no other people were nearby. Moments later, another rock followed. Then another. Frank felt the chilling sense that something was watching him from the tree line, gauging his reaction, almost playing with him. Nights in those mountains were even stranger. When darkness settled over the hills, the forests came alive with sounds that didn't belong to any animal Frank knew. Bone-rattling screams rolled across the valleys, long, mournful, and powerful enough to carry for miles. He heard whoops and whistles echoing between ridges, accompanied by heavy, deliberate footsteps circling campsites. These weren't casual movements. Whatever walked those woods at night moved with purpose, as though patrolling its territory. Frank learned to live with the unease, but as he grew older, the encounters became more frequent and more direct. On camping trips with friends, he often felt stalked. Branches cracked under enormous weight. Rocks clacked together in rhythmic signals. In one chilling moment, he stumbled upon the remains of a deer torn apart in a manner no predator in the region could replicate. It wasn't eaten in the typical way. Instead, the limbs had been twisted and pulled with tremendous force, as if by something studying the animal rather than simply feeding on it. Life eventually took Frank far from Kentucky. He joined the military and was deployed to Iraq, where the dangers were real and visible. Ironically, even in a war zone, he found himself thinking back to the mysteries of his home mountains. When he returned to the U.S., he settled in Florida, hoping for a quieter life. But Florida, with its dense swamps, old forests, and endless wildlife corridors, has its own legends. There, he met a local Bigfoot researcher who had spent decades gathering evidence across the state. As they talked, Frank realized something startling. The behaviors he had witnessed in Kentucky matched known patterns associated with Sasquatch encounters. The rock throwing, the screams, the wood knocks, the strange structures made of bent and broken branches, these were described by witnesses across the country. It was in Florida that Frank saw his experiences from childhood with new clarity. The mysterious activity wasn't random, and it wasn't isolated to Kentucky. Something seemed to be moving through wilderness areas across the continent, leaving similar signs wherever it went. The more he learned, the more he understood that the woolly boogers of his youth fit perfectly into a much broader puzzle. Driven by curiosity, and perhaps the need to finally make sense of his past, Frank continued exploring. That journey eventually took him to British Columbia, one of the most remote and heavily forested regions in the world. There, he joined Tod Standing, the controversial researcher known for his work in the documentary Discovering Bigfoot. Standing had spent years investigating a region where strange activity was reported regularly, deep knocks echoing through the trees, massive footprints appearing overnight, and nighttime encounters marked by loud, guttural calls that shook campgrounds awake. In those rugged Canadian forests, Frank felt the same presence he had known since childhood. The heavy, intentional footsteps returned. The knocking sounds, clearly coming from something powerful striking wood, reverberated through the trees. On multiple nights, audio recorders captured eerie vocalizations, long howls and sharp whoops unlike any known animal. Sometimes, he and Standing found X-shaped structures made from logs so large it would take several men to lift them, yet they were carefully placed high above the ground. The structures weren't random. They appeared to mark boundaries, perhaps signaling territory. Even with years of experience behind him, Frank couldn't shake the primal feeling of being observed. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was awareness, like he had stepped into the domain of something highly aware of him, something that tolerated his presence but could end the encounter whenever it wished. On a few occasions, he glimpsed movement, tall silhouettes slipping between trees, massive shapes disappearing before he could focus his flashlight. While he never saw a creature clearly in daylight, he was convinced that they were always near, watching from the edge of sight. The deeper Frank went into the world of Bigfoot research, the more he appreciated how widespread these experiences were. From Kentucky to Florida, from the Mammoth Cave region to the mountains of British Columbia, people reported similar encounters. They described the same sounds, the same behaviors, and sometimes even the same physical features. For Frank, this interconnectedness told a story that couldn't be ignored. These beings, whatever they are, primate, human-like, or something else entirely, seem to exist across the continent, living in places humans rarely go and communicating in ways we barely understand. Frank's story is more than a collection of frightening moments. It's a lifetime woven into the hidden world of the wilderness, a world where ancient legends might hold more truth than we realize. The Woolly Boogers of Kentucky, the shadowy figures moving through the swamps of Florida, and the towering beings slipping between the cedars of British Columbia all seem to share a thread that ties folklore to reality. Through Frank's eyes, we glimpse a wilderness that still holds secrets, a world where humans are not always the largest, loudest, or most intelligent beings in the forest. His journey reminds us that the unknown still thrives in the mountains and swamps, waiting for those willing to look, and brave enough to listen.